had pictures.
Well, he had the DVD or like video disc or whatever it was at the time, 1,000 years ago. It was the Exit Stage Left concert, and I think we watched it every day.
I think it was beta back then.
I think this was before beta.
It was like
this is pre-beta. They had those video disc things, and they would skip, and they were huge. They were like looked like records, and you'd slide it in, and you'd pull it out. They were around for maybe a year. I don't even think it lasted, but yeah, we used to play a ton of Rush songs.
And have there been an influence in you becoming a musician or playing? Or?
I mean, I was already playing at the time, but it was definitely a band that whose songs we always played. Obviously, we never had a singer at the time because nobody could sing that, so we would just play the music to it.
So
the music was so good.
We tried
you know what I mean?
to play a Rush tune, and it's just it's hard to sing.
Really hard to sing,
yeah. And what do you think, if you could recommend one track to someone who's never heard Rush before, that just will blow their mind, what track would that be?
God, there's so many great songs. Red Bar Shadows.
Light, Red Bar Shadow.
Red Bar Shadow is always a good favorite.
YYZ is a good one to just, if you're going to blow somebody's mind.
Yeah. Free Will. Good one. There's a ton of them.
Yeah, my mom and my stepdad at the time in the early 80s played in a rock cover band. It wasn't strictly Rush, they did Rush, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and Led Zeppelin, stuff like that.
So you grew up with Rush then?
I grew up with Rush, yeah, for sure. The drummer in the band, who was my stepdad at the time, was a big Neil Peart fan. Like most drummers in the early 80s, was like, Neil Peart, that's the guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's obviously an incredible drummer. One of my favorites of all time as well. I grew up on his playing and grew up on Rush's music. So, and kind of planted those seeds of wanting to play something more progressive or wanted to challenge myself more as a player. Rush kind of paved the way for that, and they were able to reach such a wide variety of people and fill stadiums, you know what I mean? So, and play this kind of technical music, but put into some kind of accessible form, even though it's got odd time signatures and it's but they were able to mask it and sort of make it really catchy and really memorable, with also being extremely technical, which is hard to do.
And what's your earliest memory of Rush? You remember hearing a song or an album?
Well, when I was a kid, my mom's band was playing those songs. I thought that they were my mom's songs and that they wrote them. You know what I mean? I had no idea. I know really. I was like 5 years old. But a couple years later, I just remember staring at 2112, that album cover for hours. Just like, whoa, tribute. That's what I've been with my mom's album collection, my dad's album collection, and staring at album covers, and looking at all the different things. But I remember that one in particular of sticking out, and want my mom to play it all the time, and wanting to hear Tom Sawyer all the time.
And what is your favorite Rush album?
2112.
2112. And if you had to recommend a track to someone who isn't a fan of Rush, that would sum up the band. And
get a best of.
Yeah, I guess that might be the best advice.
YYZ. If you play the drums, listen to YYZ.
Awesome.
What about you? You like Rush?
I do like Rush. They're awesome. You have more knowledge of that. I mean,
what's your earliest
Moving
memory?
Pictures.
Moving Pictures.
That was repeated play coming down from my older brother. So I got that's just what was played over and over and over.
Farewell to the Kings. That's a good song.
So.
Yeah.
I have all the records from the first one up till Pictures. I don't have everything, but I'm a fan of them, yes.
And what was the first Rush album or track that you heard where you just turned on to?
I think that actually was my first album was Moving Pictures. That's in 81, something like Tom Sawyer, which is a great song, and I still think it's one of their best songs, to be honest. It has a drive. It sounds a bit evil to me, that song, even though I don't think that was their intention.
Yeah.
But and it's a really fucking good production on that album, I think. And to this day, it probably is one of my favorite records. Most people would say 2112, but I think Moving Pictures is probably mine.
You're the only one to have said, everyone said 2112, so.
Well, that's a really, really good album. You know,
Yeah.
what can you say? You know.
I'm glad we got a different one in there.
I also liked Fly By Night. I remember that album with the hawk or the eagle.
Yeah.
You know. But I would have to say Tom Sawyer. Sorry, the Moving Pictures, I can play that. You know, that's probably the album I come back to most frequently.
And do you find that Rush have influenced you in Opeth, you and the guys, the playing style?
Yeah, they have. Especially the music, you know, the drumming from Neil, and the time signatures that they used. And he was doing a lot of what we call in Sweden, we call it piece, which is basically the thing you do with the hi-hat and the bass drum, which he does, or did a lot, which is something that was like, it sounds so cool, it sounds so tight, you know, so slick. So we tried to you know, we got influenced by his drumming, pretty much. And there's a song called YYZ that they did, which is a famous instrumental piece. And usually he did a drum solo, which was, I mean, the drumming on that song, on all their songs is great. Although the stuff that Neil played on is, he wasn't on the first album. But he's amazing, you know, and it was just everything with their music was just something, you know, growing up being into heavy metal, there was no real bands like that around. And this was before I got into the whole prog scene. I knew for Rush for me was a hard rock band, but they were very odd in comparison to the other bands I was listening to at the time. So yeah, they were highly influential.
And if you had to pick, I think I know what you're going to say, but if you had to pick one track for someone who's not a fan of Rush to say this sums up the band and why you love them, what track would that be?
Well, I have to say Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
That's the one who, you know, like, when I listen to that song, you know, it feels like it kind of clicks with my own ideas of, you know, the music that I write. I kind of relate to that song. That's the type. If I would have written that song, it would have felt like complete. Obviously, I did. It's a fucking shame I did. But yeah, that's a really, really, really good song, I think, and it doesn't age. It still feels fresh, as do most of their stuff, to be honest. You know, they have the mid '80s period when they were a bit more, I mean, not particularly my style maybe, but up to that album and you know, after that album too, they have, you know, they always keep putting out interesting music, I think, and they seem to like experimentation, which I like and respect. So, but if I have to pick one song, it have to be Tom Sawyer or What I Said.
My earliest memory of the band Rush is I had a friend whose name I can't remember right now, but he was super into Rush, and he had all kinds of Rush blacklight posters all over his room. And I went over to his house at we were supposed to go to school, and it was pretty early, so 8 or 9 in the morning, and his parents were gone, and we smoked some weed, and he put on 2112, and we were supposed to go to school, and I was like, no way, we gotta keep listening to this. This is so amazing. You know, the whole beginning, you know, into the Temple of Syrinx and everything, and I was completely fascinated by it. I didn't even really understand everything that was going on, but I knew in my stoned brain that I was really liking this. And then a couple buddies of mine were starting to play, and all the drummers were always talking about Neil Peart. You got to get down the Neil Peart stuff. You got to get down the Neil Peart stuff. So I had a couple of buddies who had older brothers, and their older brothers were playing a lot of the Rush stuff. And as it turns out, one of them would be this guy named Paul Bostaff, and Paul Bostaff would end up going on to Slayer, but I was in a band with his younger cousin, and he was really the first guy that got me to kind of understand the complexity of what they were doing. And then my friend Michelle Scully, who I had the biggest crush on in the world, but couldn't ever bring myself to tell her, and somehow ended up in the friend zone, but she was super rad and a very cool chick. She worshipped Rush, worshipped moving pictures, and we would sit there and drink beer and smoke tons of weed and listen to moving pictures over and over and over again. And those are my earliest memories, and I grew to completely love the band. And you know, there's been times when I was more into them, times when I was less into them, but especially on the last few records from Through the Ashes on, really been a massive inspiration to us. You know, just the way that they've done things and the way that they've arranged songs, and the way that they, even on moving pictures, you know, watching the DVD documentary and how they allowed themselves to be influenced by modern music, the Police, punk, you know, incorporated into what they were already doing. Something that, as a band on our 7th record, was a massive inspiration and was a huge part of our upcoming album, Onto the Locust. So Rush, completely amazed and honored to have you on the label, and super stoked. Congrats.
One more